I'm a revert and here are my tips on reading the Quran. First of all, you're going to need to get a copy of the Quran. You could get a physical one like I do, that's my preferred method. There's loads of translations online for free. Let's be honest, unless you read Arabic, you're going to have to focus on a translation. And they all do very different things, therefore very different audiences. But I promise you, a translation is better than no translation. Pick one based on your price point and what's going to be easiest for you. Everyone has a preference on their translation. I personally have a preference on the translations that I'm currently reading. But at the end of the day, any translation is better than none. Next, an absolute shock horror. You're going to have to start reading the Quran. Now, this piece of advice is twofold. First of all, you're not going to understand everything on your first run. You're not going to understand anything on your first read. This is a long process, and remember, the Quran was revealed over 23 years. And if you think that you're the person who's going to buck a trend, there's going to be a hard lesson at the end of it. Guess what? You're not perfect. So you gotta know, you gotta get into your noggin, you're not going to understand everything. Secondly, do not overwhelm yourself. If you start reading the second surah, the cow, which is the longest surah, and you begin to wane in concentration, you begin to feel as though you've bitten off way more than you can chew, put it down. Just put the Quran down and mull over what you've currently read. I never take any notes. Everything that I do on video, by the way, just to let you know, I read the Quran and give my thought on YouTube. There's a playlist somewhere on this channel. Maybe I'll link it down below. I'm not going to promise that because I always say that I'll do it and I never do it. But I do that. I never take notes. Everything is kind of spieled off from what I can remember and what I can muster to remember on the day. Again, as soon as I feel overwhelmed or that I'm not concentrated, I put the Quran down. You'll know your limits, and the more that you read, the more you'll understand where your limits are. And while I'll say to not overestimate what you can do, never underestimate the Quran. The Quran is very simple. And I think simplicity can sometimes make people feel that it's going to be easy. But there are a lot of truths, there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from a single verse. In its simplicity comes a lot of complexity. Do not underestimate the Quran. It doesn't matter what translation you pick up, they will all be getting the general gist of what was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They will give you a understanding of what the original Quranic Arabic is trying to say in the simplest way possible. But to stress, to reiterate, its simplicity does not mean that it has no complexity. The Quran is very complex at times. Next, I think it's something worth saying that I don't think a lot of people do say, and that is, it's okay to not read the Quran. Like, you'll know when is the right time. You will know when you have the capacity and the space to read the Quran. You can't force the reading of the Quran. Well, you can force it. You can pick up the Quran and begin reading it. But again, with its complexity, in its simplicity, and being able to dedicate that time to take in and reflect on what the Quran is saying, you need to know when to pick it up. There's no point in reading the Quran if you're not willing to understand what the Quran is saying. Especially when you move into like Surah 100 and above, where they're very short. You could bash out a lot of those surahs in a single sitting. But I promise you, being able to understand what they say takes way longer than the actual reading of the Quran. As a beginner reading the Quran for the first time, as a revert, and I would even go as far to say as a lifelong Muslim, this advice is true. And that is, it's okay to question the Quran. It's okay that if you have something that's niggling you, if it's something that doesn't feel right, to go and ask the questions. And if you don't want to put yourself in front of anyone to ask it. We have this wonderful thing called the internet, and the internet will definitely show you that someone has had the exact same question as you before. Read the responses, read the rebuttals, take everything with a little pinch of salt online. People try to make the Quran as easy as possible, but again, in its simplicity is its complexity. And lastly, I'm going to reiterate basically the first point, and that is, take your time. The Quran was not revealed in one day. It took 23 years. This is not a race, it is a lifelong marathon. And every marathon starts with a single step. And just taking one step is closer to the end than taking none. Do what you can. I promise you, inshallah, it will all be worthwhile in the end.